Hi guys, today I'll make a recipe for you that is different from all of the other Indian recipes that you're probably used to. This is called Methi Chicken or Fenugreek chicken. That's made with fenugreek, which is a green leafy vegetable that's used extensively in Indian cooking. And this is one recipe that is scrumptious and it's very easy to do, and all of those people who actually eat it, they never fail to rave about it. So I thought I'll share the recipe with you. So follow along with me as I go through the recipe, and along the way I'll also give you tips and tricks on how to make the perfect Indian curry every single time. So let's go and have a look at the ingredients first. So what we have here is methi or fenugreek. For people who haven't seen this before, it has these sort of round leaves and it has these pretty tough sort of stalks as well. And this is one vegetable that grows very easily, and that is why you find this fresh here in Ireland. This is Irish grown, and if you're Indian, you obviously know what methi is, and outside of India you can easily get this in all of your Indian or Asian stores because this is very extensively used in Indian cooking. So we're going to use all of this, including the stalks and the leaves. We're not going to waste anything. I'll show you that later on how that is done. Next we have some cream that we're going to add at the very end to add some roundness and a bit of luxury to the dish. In terms of the cooking oil, I'm going to be using mustard oil, but you can also use ghee or vegetable oil or butter or olive oil. Doesn't matter which oil you use, is not that important to the dish, but I'm just going to use mustard oil because I think it adds a nice sort of a nuttiness to the flavor, so that's why I'm going to use that. Next is ginger paste. If you don't have ginger paste, then you can use ground ginger as well. That works. Next, in terms of the chicken, we are going to be using chicken thighs. These have a bone in them and these are skinless. So I have 8 of these here, which is roughly 1200 grams. So one thing about Indian cooking is that we never use chicken with the skin in 95% of the cases. Of course, India is a massive country, so in certain regions you do use the skin, but 95% of the time you will never ever use chicken with skin on it. So that is one tip, that always whenever you cook in Indian food, get the chicken skinless. And in this case I'm using the chicken thigh with a bone in it because chicken thigh compared to the breast retains a lot of the juiciness in the end product. And so that's another tip, that you should try and use thigh as much as possible, or use chicken legs and try and have them with a bone inside it. I know some people prefer chicken boneless, but that dries out quickly, right? So whenever you have bone inside it, it doesn't dry out as much. So important tip. Next we have some onions. We have red onions. In Indian cooking, again, we don't generally use white onions, we use red onions. So important, very important. We have 2 tomatoes here. And then in terms of our whole spices, we have 4 cloves, we have 2 black cardamoms, we have an inch of cinnamon, and then this is dried fenugreek. It's the same fenugreek what we have here, but this is dried. And this is called Kasoori Methi because this comes from Kasoor in Pakistan. So this is also an important part of the dish, and this is very easily accessible in all of your Indian and Asian stores, very commonly used in Indian and Pakistani cooking. And then we have 2 finger chillies. This is not again for the heat, this is more to add some flavor to the dish. So when you add just 2 of these, it's not going to make it spicy or hot, it's just going to add a nice roundness to the dish. And then moving on to our powdered spices, what all we're going to use today is turmeric, haldi, some Kashmiri red chili powder. Again, this is not hot, this is basically to add flavor to the dish. So we're going to add that. This is Kashmiri red chili powder. This is not the hot chili powder, this is more to add color and to add flavor to the dish. Next we're going to add an important spice in Indian cooking, which is coriander powder. So we're going to add that. This is important in the dish. And then at the end we're going to add garam masala. which is also something that's very commonly used in Indian cooking. This is going to be added at the end or near to the end. So that is all the ingredients what we're going to use. So with that, let's start with the cooking. Okay, so step one, I'm going to put in the mustard oil into the pan, a good amount of it, so that it basically is enough for all of the chicken that we have. So basically 2 glugs of it, if that is a unit of measure. And I'll show you a trick with mustard oil that you can use. So mustard oil, because it's made of mustard, by definition it's very pungent. So I'm not looking for the pungency of the mustard oil in the food. So what I can do is that I can actually extract the sweetness of the mustard, and how that is done is basically by adding a bit of water to the mustard oil and then closing it and letting it splutter, and at the end what you have is sort of a sweet, almost a ghee like flavor. So I'm going to do that now, but you have to be careful while doing that because it really does splutter. So I'm going to add a bit of water here into this thing and it will start spluttering, as you can see. So now as you can see, it has started spluttering. So I've just closed it, and now you just need to wait it out for 2 minutes until it stops spluttering. So that is going to extract the sweetness out of the mustard oil. Okay, so after 5 minutes, the oil has stopped spluttering. As you can see, I've lifted the lid, and now if you actually smell it, you will see that the pungency is gone, right? So it almost has sort of a sweet smell to it, almost like ghee. So now we are ready to actually put in our whole spices. So first of all, I'll go in with my cinnamon, my 2 black cardamoms, and then my 4 cloves. Once they go in, after that I'll straight away go in with my onion, which I have roughly sliced. You can also chop it if you want, but it doesn't matter because it's going to disintegrate at the very end. So I'll go in with that as well. It's all going to go in. And also at the same time, I'll go in with a good tablespoon of the ginger paste. So that goes in now at this point. And once that is done, at a medium flame, I just want all of this to cook through. So now that I've gone in with my ginger and my onions, I want this to cook through perfectly so that the onions go brown. So that is also an important tip with Indian cooking. So whenever you're cooking chicken or any meat-based gravy, and if it is onion-based, you want to ensure that the onions actually brown perfectly, right? So you don't want them to be half done or translucent. You want them to go brown, and that adds a lot of depth to the flavor of the dish. So while that is happening, you can actually leave them. You don't have to sort of stir them around too much. Just at a medium flame, keep an eye on them, and while that is happening, we can move on to chopping the rest of our stuff. So we'll let that go for the moment. Okay, so after a good 5 to 7 minutes, here you can see that the onion is nice and brown. So at this point, we are actually ready to put in our tomatoes. So now these are going to go in. And immediately at the same time, when we add in our tomatoes, at this point we can go in with our spices. So let's go and add our spices into the mix. So first of all, so we'll now add in our spices. So I'll go in with a spoon and a half of the red chilli powder. Again, this is not spicy, it's only to add color and flavor. I will add turmeric, so not too much. I'm just adding about half a spoon of this, and then we're going to add 2 spoons of the coriander powder. And also at the same time, we are also going to go in with our dried fenugreek that we looked at previously. So we're going to add that at this point. So normally in Indian cooking, you would see that people tend to add this later. But if you look at restaurants, they basically add it earlier. So that adds more flavor to the whole dish. So I'm going to add that. So that is done. And then we just give it a nice mix. So now that we have put in all of our masalas in with the tomatoes, we want the tomatoes and the masalas to cook through together, for the tomatoes to break down and for the masala to cook properly. And a good indicator that the masala or the spices have cooked through properly is that it's going to basically release all of the oil, and you're going to see that the whole gravy or all of the masala is basically going to release all of the oil, and it's almost glistening. So that is a very good indicator that the masalas are cooked through properly. And this is again a very important tip to separate the beginners from the pros, is that they wait for the masalas to cook through properly. So we're going to do that, and in the meanwhile, if you see that it is burning somewhere, you can just add a bit of water, not too much, just a little bit, so that it doesn't burn. That's it. And so we're going to wait for that, and to ensure that it doesn't dry out too much, at the same time you can basically put the lid on and ensure that the heat is low to medium, and just wait for the thing to cook properly. So now we'll just wait for about 5 minutes for the tomatoes to break down and the masalas to cook through. So while our masala is cooking, we can move over to the fenugreek and we can see how we're going to actually cut this. So to use in the dish, you have 2 options. You can just use the leaves, but I also like using a bit of the stalk. So I would use stalk until here, basically from the top, not the whole thing, because it adds a nice roundness to the flavor. And in terms of the taste of methi or fenugreek, if you haven't had it before, it has a slight bitterness to it. It's not too bitter, but it has a slight bitterness to it, almost like kale, if you've had kale, but it's not as boring. So that is roughly what the flavor is like. And when you add the stalks have a lot of flavor in them, so that is why I like using them. So today I'm going to use the stalks as well. So the trick to use the stalks, because they are actually very tough, right? So they are actually very tough stalks compared to, if you compare it to coriander, for example, or parsley. So they're much thicker, and so the trick to actually using them is basically that you have to chop them very fine, so that they don't have a lot of texture to themselves once they are actually put in the chicken. So that is important. So I'll show you how exactly we're going to chop them and what they look like after I've chopped them. So now I have chopped the methi or the fenugreek, and you can see how thin I went. So all of the stalks are this small, if you can see it, right? So that is how thin you want to go, so that it's easy to enough and it's not chewy to bite in the chicken, so it will completely disintegrate. That's how thin you want to go. With some of the leaves, it's okay if they're that big. It's mostly the stalks that you have to be concerned about. So once you go down to that level, then you can actually use the stalks. It's always a good idea to have a nice knife, so it's not too difficult to do. It takes a couple of minutes, literally. So you have to get it this thin. And now this is going to be added later in the process, so I'm just going to keep it aside for the moment. So now let's have a look at our masala. I've waited for a good 7 to 8 minutes, and I've added a little bit of water along the way as well. And now you can see that it's actually cooked properly. The tomatoes have disintegrated, and you can see that the masala has kind of let out its oil, so it's all glistening, as you can see here, right? So this is a good time to now add in the chicken. So I'm just going to increase the flame a little bit, and I'm going to go in with my chicken at this point. So I go in with all of my 8 chicken thighs. I'm just going in whole because I find that it's a much nicer eating experience when you basically have entire chicken thighs. And also another thing with the dish itself is that if you don't want to eat chicken, you can actually supplement this with paneer as well, which is Indian cottage cheese, which goes very well with the methi. So now that we have added the chicken to the masala, we want to saute it together with the masala and make sure that it mixes very well with the masala and the masala coats it properly. And then we want to give it a bit of color, so we're going to cook it on high heat for a couple of minutes. So we're going to do that now. So make sure that everything is mixed in perfectly. And so once that is done, we let it cook on one side for a little while. The heat is high, and make sure that you don't let it just sit on high heat on one side for too long, otherwise it's going to burn. So just keep on moving it every 30 seconds or so. So now, as you can see, that the chicken is mixed very well with the masala, and it's sorted for a good while on high heat for a couple of minutes. And so now I can see that it's starting to cook a little bit. So I'm happy now to basically turn on the heat to absolute minimum, to 0, and then put on the lid and let this cook for a good 20 minutes until the chicken is almost cooked. You don't need to put in any water into this at the moment, because the chicken itself has a lot of moisture in it, and as it cooks, it's going to release all of that moisture, and that is going to be enough to cook the gravy for the moment. If we need water, we can add it at a later stage, but for now, because it is covered, it is safe to not add any water. And so we'll completely cover it, and then we'll let it cook on the lower flame, so that it's not too high, and let it cook for a good 20 minutes. So we'll do that. And if you didn't know, you can basically put the ladle like that. That's a life hack. So there you go. So we'll let this cook now for a good 15 to 20 minutes. I'll move it over to the smaller flame so that it's gentle on the chicken, and it'll cook through nicely. So this is roughly 20 minutes later. You can see that the chicken has left all of its moisture. So there's a lot of water here in the masala, and you can see that the chicken is almost cooked 3/4 of the way. So we are in a good place now to add in the rest of our ingredients. So we will now go in with the fenugreek and the green chilli. So now we can go in with our fenugreek. We're going to add that to the chicken. We also go in with our green chilli that I have basically chopped, as you can see here. So I'm going to add that in. I'm going to add some water into this, about 3/4 of a cup. That should be enough. So that is all how much I need. So I've added in the water. I'm going to give it a nice mix, and since I've added fenugreek and water into this, I'm going to turn the flame high. So I'll let it come to a boil on high heat. So now we can see that it has come to a boil, so it's bubbling away. At this point, I'm going to add in the garam masala. So I'm going to add a spoon and a half here, roughly. The reason that we add garam masala at almost the very end is that it adds a nice aroma to the dish, and the garam masala is made of roasted whole spices. So they're already roasted, right? So that is why you don't actually put it earlier, because they're already cooked. So that is the reason that it is generally added at the very end. So whenever you want to enhance the aroma of your dish, you can add a bit of garam masala at the very end. So that's a very handy tip to be aware of. So now that we have put in the garam masala, we can just give it a little mix. let it come to a proper boil, and once it is boiling away, which it is now, at this point I can put the lid back on here, and then turn it down to low to a medium sim, and then I'll let it go again for a good 15 to 20 minutes. At this point I don't want too much water, so I can actually leave the lid half open as what we have here. So it's going to ensure that some of the water evaporates in the cooking process. So we'll leave it like that for about 15 to 20 minutes. Always come back and check if it's running out of water. You can always add a bit more water, or you can basically close the lid at that point if you feel that the water is getting low. So we're going to do that. We want the fenugreek at this point to cook through nicely, and we want the chicken to complete its cooking. So that is what we are looking for here. So let's wait. Okay, so this is 20 to 25 minutes later, and I've moved the chicken from the smaller flame to the bigger flame, the main flame, and I can see now that the chicken is cooked through nicely, that the fenugreek is cooked through, and I'm happy with the consistency of the gravy. So this is what it looks like. So now we can move on to the final steps of this recipe. First of all, I'll go in with salt, so you can add salt as per your convenience. So I've added a good amount of salt. And one more tip for you guys is that to be a good chef or a good cook, always taste your food. Always taste your food. So now we'll go in with the cream, a good dollop of cream. Make sure that the gas is on low flame. I've just added a couple of glugs of cream. If you need more, we can add more. But now you'll see that the whole look of the dish is going to change drastically that I have added the cream now. So it's going to take on a creamy sort of a texture. So I'll mix it up a bit. Now that it's all mixed in nicely, I can just turn the heat a bit higher, slightly higher. I don't want to cook it too vigorously, but just a bit higher, so that basically we get the cream to boil a little bit. But now you can see that the texture has taken on a perfect sort of luxurious look to it. So this is what adds a level of sort of comfort food like happiness to the food, and this is looking beautiful right now. I cannot wait to taste this. So I'll just wait for the cream to mix through and come to a boil, and once that is done, we are ready to serve this. So I've taken out the final product into a bowl. This is what it looks like. I've just garnished it with some fine ginger juliennes, so it looks nice, and I've just added a bit of cream on the top just to make it look more presentable. And this is the perfect methi chicken. Okay, so now we'll move on to the main agenda of this whole exercise, which is the taste test. So this is what our chicken looks like. I'm going to take a little bit of the gravy here that you see. So let's try this out. So I'll take just a bit of that gravy. It is really good. So what I taste in here is a bit of roundness coming in from the cream that we added, and then the spices are perfectly balanced. It's not spicy, but there is just that little hint of chili coming through from the 2 green chilies that we added. Flavor of the chicken is obviously there, and then that ever so slight bitterness of that fenugreek. It has just a little bit of a bite because we cut it so fine that it's completely almost melted through, but there is just that little bit of a bite that kind of adds excitement to the food. So that's all there is to that. It is not spicy again. It is perfectly balanced. It is something that you'll basically crave every once in a while. So really happy with the way that this turned out. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making the thing. I hope that you actually try it out, and when you do, let me know how it turned out for you. And thanks for your time.